Ethan had always been a quiet man. People in the city often passed by him without noticing. He worked in small places, fixing tools, carrying loads, and doing the kind of work that most people forgot about once it was done. He never spoke much, not because he did not know how, but because silence had become part of his life. In a world where loud voices ruled, Ethan's quiet nature often made him invisible. One morning, his life changed without warning. Soldiers of the Royal Guard came through the narrow streets of the city. Their armor shone under the sun, and their steps echoed with power. They looked at the people one by one, as if searching for something. When their eyes fell on Ethan, he felt his heart beat faster. He had done nothing wrong, but the look they gave him was enough to bring fear. "You, come with us," one soldier said. Ethan wanted to ask why, but his voice stuck in his throat. He simply nodded and followed. The people around him stared, whispering to each other. No one dared to ask questions when the soldiers were involved. The journey to the palace was long. Ethan had seen the tall towers from a distance many times, but he never thought he would walk through its gates. The palace stood like a world of its own, shining with glass and stone, guarded by walls that touched the sky. Inside, everything glowed with beauty crystal lamps, long halls, and carvings of kings and queens from the past. The soldiers led Ethan to a grand hall. At the far end of it sat Queen Amelia. She wore a crown that sparkled under the light and a gown that flowed like silver water. Her eyes were sharp but heavy, as if carrying a pain no one else could see. Standing near her was a little girl, no more than 10 years old, with the same silver hair. She clutched her hands together and looked down, avoiding the eyes of the people in the hall. "Who is this?" the queen asked. "Your Majesty, this is a worker from the lower city," one guard replied. "He was chosen by lot, as you commanded." The queen's eyes studied Ethan. He lowered his head, unsure of what she saw in him. After a long silence, she spoke again. "He will serve in the palace." "But hear me well, boy," she said firmly. "You will not speak unless spoken to. Do you understand?" Ethan nodded quickly. He did not dare to lift his eyes. The guards placed him among other workers, but Ethan noticed something different. Unlike the others, he was always placed closer to the queen's daughter. Her name, he soon learned, was Clara. She did not play with other children of the court. While the halls echoed with laughter and music, Clara stayed silent, her eyes wandering like a bird trapped in a cage. At first, Ethan only watched her from a distance. He saw how she tried to follow conversations but failed to catch the words. He noticed the sadness in her face when people spoke and laughed without her. He noticed how servants treated her kindly but never truly understood her. One afternoon when the gardens were empty, Clara sat alone near the fountain. She traced her fingers on the stone, lost in her thoughts. Ethan walked past, carrying a basket. He hesitated, then stopped. Slowly, carefully, he raised his hands and signed a simple word. "Hello?" Clara froze. Her eyes widened, and she looked up at him with shock. Then, almost like light breaking through clouds, a smile spread across her face. She moved her hands quickly, answering him in the same silent language. "You know this," she signed. Ethan nodded. Clara's smile grew wider, brighter than anything he had seen in the palace. For the first time since he entered the queen's halls, Ethan felt noticed. The little girl's eyes sparkled, and she began to ask him more with her hands, fast and full of life. He answered as best as he could, his fingers moving slowly but clearly. That moment, something unseen connected them. Clara, who had been alone in silence, found a friend who could hear her without sound. Ethan, who had been told to stay quiet, found a voice through his hands. Neither of them knew that in the high windows of the palace, the queen sometimes watched. She saw her daughter's sudden laughter, her shining eyes, and the way the quiet man brought her joy without ever speaking a word. The palace seemed less cold after that day. For Clara, the world had always been filled with silence and empty space. But now her silence was shared, and it no longer felt so lonely. Every time she saw Ethan, her heart lifted. She looked forward to the moments when he would pass through the gardens or bring water to the hall. Each time, his hands moved gently, forming the words she longed to hear in her own way. Ethan was careful. He remembered the warning that he must never speak without permission. And though he did not use his voice, He knew even his hands could draw attention. Still, when no one else was looking, he signed to Clara. He told her about the streets he had walked, about the birds he had watched, about the simple things he knew from the lower city. She listened with wide eyes, answering with her own quick hands. For her, these small talks were treasures, and for him, they were moments of light in a life that had been filled with shadows. Days passed, and Clara grew braver. Where once she hid from the noise of the court, she now searched for Ethan with eager steps. When he carried baskets to the kitchens, she followed. When he cleaned the stone floors, she sat nearby. Sometimes she laughed so hard at his signs that the sound startled even herself. It was a soft laugh, unsure, but real, and Ethan smiled every time he heard it. But the palace was a place where every eye watched. Queen began to notice the changes in her daughter. Amelia had lived with sorrow since Clara was born, unable to hear. Though she had tried to protect and love her, the queen knew her child carried a weight no crown could take away. She had accepted that her daughter would live in silence forever, never to share in the voices of the court. Yet now she saw something different. One evening the queen stood by a tall window that opened toward the gardens. She looked down and saw Clara waving her hands in bright, swift motions. Ethan sat beside her, his face calm, his hands answering with care. Clara's face glowed with joy. For the first time in years, Amelia's heart felt light, though her eyes filled with tears. She did not yet understand how, but she knew this quiet man had given her daughter something she thought lost forever. Still, the palace was not free of whispers. Some of the servants began to notice. They muttered about how often the girl and the worker were together. Guards shook their heads when they saw Clara pulling Ethan toward her games. To them, it was strange, even dangerous, that a common man had found such closeness with the royal child. They said little aloud, but the looks they gave were heavy with judgment. Ethan felt the stares. He tried to stay invisible, to lower his eyes and walk softly, but Clara's joy pulled him back every time. He could not leave her in silence. He could not turn away when she smiled at him, as if he were the only person who truly saw her. One day in the great hall, the court gathered for a feast. Music filled the air, laughter rolled through the golden chamber, and the sound of voices echoed against the high ceiling. Clara sat beside her mother, her eyes moving from one talking mouth to another, but the words never reached her. She lowered her head, her hands still, her heart sinking back into loneliness. From across the room, Ethan stood among the workers, carrying trays of fruit. His eyes found hers. In that moment, Clara looked up and met his gaze. Slowly, carefully, he raised his hands and signed a simple phrase. "Are you all right?" Clara's face changed. Her sadness melted into surprise, then into joy. She answered him, not caring that people were watching. Her hands moved quickly, asking him to stay near, telling him that she was happy he was there. The hall began to fall quiet as some noticed. Murmurs spread. The queen herself turned her head, her eyes falling upon the exchange between her daughter and the silent man. Clara laughed softly, her hands still moving, and Ethan answered without hesitation. For the first time, Amelia saw her daughter not as a child trapped in silence, but as a girl speaking freely. Alive, with her own voice. Tears filled the queen's eyes. She pressed a hand against her mouth, overcome by the sight. The hall, once filled with sound, now felt still, as if everyone sensed that something greater than words had passed between them. Ethan lowered his hands slowly, afraid he had gone too far, but Clara's glowing smile gave him courage. The queen did not speak. She only looked at her daughter, her heart breaking and healing at the same time. And Ethan, the man told to stay silent, realized that his silence had become the bridge that gave a princess her freedom. The days after the feast were quiet, but filled with change. The queen could not forget what she had seen in the great hall. For years, she had prayed for her daughter to feel less alone, yet no scholar, no priest, and no nobleman had ever given her hope. It was the common worker, the man who spoke with his hands, who had done what no one else could. Amelia's heart was torn between joy and fear. She wanted to protect this new light in her daughter's life, but she knew the court would not understand. Clara, however, no longer cared for the eyes of others. She searched for Ethan every morning, her small feet running through the long corridors. When she found him, she would pull his hand, eager to tell him what she had dreamed, or what she wished to see that day. Her laughter filled the empty corners of the palace. Where silence once weighed heavily, there was now movement and joy. Hush, hush. Ethan felt the weight of every glance that followed him. Guards frowned when Clara refused to sit with the other children. Servants whispered when they saw her waiting for him in the garden. Some even muttered that the queen had grown careless, letting a low-born worker stand so close to her daughter, yet Ethan could not stop. When Clara's hands moved quickly with excitement, he forgot the fear. When her eyes shone with life, he forgot the warnings. One afternoon, the queen called for Ethan. He entered the throne room with his head bowed, his steps slow and careful. The hall was nearly empty, only a few guards standing near the pillars. Queen sat in her chair, her crown catching the soft light. Clara stood beside her, her hand gripping her mother's sleeve. The queen's eyes fixed on Ethan. "You have been close to my daughter," she said. Her voice was calm, but her tone carried weight. Ethan lowered his gaze and gave a small nod. He wanted to explain, but words failed him. Clara quickly raised her hands, signing with speed and urgency. "He understands me, mother. Speaks to me." Amelia's eyes softened as she watched her daughter. Clara's face glowed, her movement strong and sure. The queen turned back to Ethan. "You know her language?" she said quietly. "Yes, Your Majesty," Ethan finally whispered. His voice was low, unused, almost uncertain. "I learned long ago. My sister could not hear. I could not let her live in silence, so I learned." The queen's breath caught, and for a moment her stern mask slipped. She had never heard him speak before, but his words carried truth. Clara tugged at her sleeve again, her hands moving. "Please, mother, let him stay." The queen closed her eyes, and tears slipped down her cheeks. For years, she had carried the sorrow of watching her daughter sit alone, unable to join the world around her. Now, before her eyes, Clara was alive with joy. Amelia stood, her gown sweeping across the floor, and stepped closer to Ethan. "You have given her something I could not," she said softly.
What?
"You have given her a voice."
What?
Ethan bowed his head deeply, his chest heavy with emotion. But outside the queen's chamber, not everyone shared her gratitude. In the following days, nobles whispered among themselves. They saw the queen's tears and the princess's smiles, but to them it was dangerous. A servant had stepped beyond his place. A worker had touched the heart of the royal family. They feared what it could mean for their power. During a council meeting, one noble spoke boldly. "Your Majesty, it is not fitting that a common man spends so much time with the princess. The people will talk.
Oh.
They will wonder if the throne has lowered itself." The queen's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing at first. Another noble added, "There are dangers. What if he seeks more than he should? What if he uses the girl's trust?" Amelia's hand tightened on the arm of her chair. She wanted to shout, to tell them they were blind, but she held her tongue. She knew the council was already restless. Meanwhile, Ethan and Clara's bond grew stronger. He taught her new signs every day, helping her shape words she had never known before. She told him her thoughts, her fears, her dreams. He told her about the world beyond the palace walls, about rivers and markets, and the laughter of children playing in the streets. Their worlds blended together, one of silence and one of sound, until it felt like there was no wall between them at all. But even as joy filled the gardens and halls where they met, shadows of doubt spread in the court. Some saw love and hope, others saw danger. And Ethan, though he felt peace in Clara's company, knew that each day might bring the moment when silence would no longer be enough to protect him. The whispers in the palace grew louder with each passing day. What began as quiet murmurs among servants soon reached the ears of the nobles. They did not like the sight of Clara smiling at a worker. They did not like how often the queen's eyes softened whenever she saw Ethan. In their minds, such closeness was dangerous. They feared the queen's trust in a common man would weaken the throne and stir unrest among the people. Ethan noticed the change. Guards who once ignored him now watched every step he took. Servants who once greeted him with polite nods now turned away. Even in the busy kitchens, voices fell silent when he entered. He knew he was becoming a target, but he could not bring himself to pull away from Clara. Each time she reached for him with her small hands. Each time her eyes lit up when he signed a word, his fear was forgotten. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the palace towers, Ethan carried a basket through the quiet hall. A nobleman stepped out from the shadows, blocking his path. The man's cloak was heavy with gold thread, and his face was sharp with disdain. "You forget your place," the nobleman said coldly. "You are here to serve, not to raise your hands before the princess." Ethan kept his eyes low. "I mean no harm," he said softly. "No harm," the man hissed. "The queen weeps because of you. The child clings to you as if you are family. Do you think the court will allow this?" Ethan did not answer. He bowed and tried to pass, but the noble's hand gripped his arm tightly. "Stay away from her, or you will regret the day you entered these gates." That night, Ethan lay awake in his small chamber. He thought of leaving, of slipping out before dawn. But when he remembered Clara's bright smile, he knew he could not go. She needed him, and though the palace walls closed in around him, he would not abandon her to silence again. The next day, Clara found him in the garden as always. She signed eagerly, telling him of a dream she had. Ethan tried to smile, but his hands moved more slowly than before. Clara noticed at once. She tugged his sleeve, her eyes full of worry. "Are you hurt?" she asked with her hands. "No," Ethan signed back. "Do not worry." But Clara shook her head. She was not blind to the tension around them. She had seen the guards watching, the servants whispering. She signed again, faster this time. "Promise you will not leave me." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "I promise." What neither of them knew was that the council was already plotting. That evening, in a chamber lit by tall candles, several nobles gathered. Their voices were low, but filled with anger. "The queen has grown weak," one said. "Her heart is blind. She trusts a man who has no name, no power, no blood. Must be removed," another answered. "If we allow this to continue, who knows what place he might claim in the court?" And so they planned to turn the queen against him. Lies were whispered into her ears. Stories of how Ethan sought more than friendship, how he dreamed of power through the princess. When Amelia heard the words, her heart burned with anger, yet doubt began to creep into her mind. She remembered the tears that had fallen when she saw her daughter laugh, but now shadows of fear clouded those memories. Could it be true? Could this man who seemed so humble carry hidden ambition? The queen called Ethan once more into the throne room. Clara stood beside her, her eyes wide with worry. The guards lined the walls, their expressions cold. "You have been faithful to my daughter," the queen said slowly, "but there are those who say you seek more than her trust. They say you dream of power. Tell me, is it true?" Ethan's heart sank. He shook his head at once. "No, your majesty. I want nothing but her happiness. I would never betray her." Clara stepped forward, signing quickly. "He speaks the truth. He is my friend. He is my voice." The queen's eyes filled with tears again, but the weight of the council pressed down on her. She dismissed Ethan, her hand trembling as she waved him away. Clara ran to him, clutching his arm, refusing to let go until the guards pulled her back. As Ethan left the hall, the nobles smiled in secret. They believed they had won. They believed the silent man would soon be forgotten. But Ethan's promise still burned in his heart. No matter what the court planned, he would not let Clara fall back into the shadows of silence. The days that followed were heavy with silence, not the kind Clara once knew, but the silence of fear. Ethan kept to his work, careful not to draw attention, yet his heart was restless. The queen's doubt, the noble's whispers, and Clara's worried eyes haunted him with every step. He wanted to protect her, but he felt the walls of the palace closing in. Then one night the palace was shaken by the sound of alarm bells. A group of men had entered the outer grounds, moving swiftly under the cover of darkness. They were rebels, angry at the throne, and they had chosen this night to strike. Guards rushed through the halls, steel clashing as voices shouted orders. Panic filled the palace as servants ran and doors slammed shut. Ethan was in the lower hall when the noise reached him. He saw the guards running toward the gates, but his thoughts were not of battle. His thoughts were of Clara. Without hesitation, he turned and ran toward the royal chambers. Clara was there, wide-eyed and trembling as the sound of shouting echoed outside. The queen stood near her, surrounded by a small guard of soldiers. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady as she gave orders. When she saw Ethan burst into the chamber, the guards raised their weapons. "Stand back," one shouted. But Clara rushed forward, signing quickly with desperate hands. "He will protect us. Let him stay." The queen hesitated. She looked at Ethan, her eyes torn between doubt and hope. In that moment, the shouts outside grew louder. The rebels were closer now, their steps echoing in the halls. Ethan turned to the guards. "They will come through the West Passage," he said firmly. His voice was calm, though his heart pounded. "The windows there are weak. Block them now." The guards stared at him in surprise. Ethan raised his hands and signed to Clara, asking her to show the soldiers the signals he would use. Together they moved swiftly, setting up a silent system of warnings. One signal for danger ahead, another for retreat, another for when the enemy turned. As the rebels forced their way inside, the Queen watched in awe as Ethan directed the guards without shouting. His signals carried across the chamber, clear and sharp. Clara stood at his side, copying his movements so that everyone could follow. For the first time, her silence became power. She was no longer hidden. She was leading. The rebels stormed into the halls, but they were met with strong defense. Each time they tried to advance, Ethan's signals guided the guards, blocking their moves and forcing them back. The Queen's soldiers fought with new strength, no longer confused by shouts, but united under one silent language. The battle lasted long into the night, but at last the rebels were driven out. The palace door slammed shut, and the sound of clashing steel faded into silence once more. When it was over, the guards stood breathing hard, their faces marked with sweat and dust. Ethan lowered his hands slowly, his body trembling with exhaustion. Clara clung to his arm, her eyes bright with relief. The Queen stepped forward. She looked at the guards, then at her daughter, and finally at Ethan. Her eyes filled with tears. "You were told to stay silent," she said softly, her voice breaking. "But your silence has saved us. You gave my daughter a voice, and tonight you gave this palace its strength." The nobles who had doubted him stood in the shadows, their faces pale with shame. They could no longer deny what they had seen. The man they had tried to cast out had protected the throne they claimed to defend. The Queen turned to Ethan once more. "You are no longer a servant," she declared. "From this day, you are protector of the crown and protector of my daughter." Clara smiled, her small hands moving quickly. She signed to her mother, and then to Ethan, her heart too full for words. Ethan answered her with steady hands, promising he would never leave her side. The court had seen many victories, but none as silent and as powerful as this. A man who was told to remain unseen had changed the fate of a kingdom without ever raising his voice. And in the quiet that followed, the Queen wept openly, not with sorrow, but with pride and gratitude. For in the end, it was not sound that carried the day, but silence and the love that filled it.